Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ricardo Ramos, and I have the privilege of serving as an assistant professor and the program director for the Master's in Higher Education at Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego. And I am so excited to be among so many student leaders from across the country who are passionate about inspiring, empowering, and transforming the lives of our students so that they can achieve college success and their vocational calling. As I reflected back on the theme for this conference, I started to think that much like we as believers are sojourners living as temporary guests on this earth, really longing for our eternal home with God, some of our students may find themselves as foreigners learning and growing as members of our institutions, being prepared for their calling and how they will produce kingdom impact for the glory of God, but not fully feeling supported or empowered to succeed. So what do we do when we encounter these students? What should our approach be so that as we continue to serve all of our students, our light might shine and our approach can be one that brings glory to God by the way that we empower these sojourners to achieve all that He has planned for them in their lives and the lives that they will continue to have a ripple effect on. So please feel free to drop your questions, your thoughts, your comments in the chat as I move through the session, and I look forward to our live discussion during our Q&A time. So this session is titled Empowering the Sojourner, Bridging the Gap Between Higher Education and Home Life for Student Success. Over the years, I've worked in higher education. I had the privilege of serving in student affairs. I was the dean of students and oversaw departments resident life, student life, spiritual life, service life. And in all those programs and all those activities, I began to see some trends that I began to question, right? Are these approaches, are the activities we're doing really meeting the needs of all of our students? And as I began to look at what models or frameworks influence our approaches, I really started to see themes that show up across institutions and the activities that they do. So today I want to begin with some of the traditional persistence models or approaches to retention of these students, so that you may think and really consider, how are these showing up, and are these the best approaches or models for your institution? And it's not just for the sake of retaining students, right? To keep their tuition and grow the institution. No, it's for the sake of, how do we support these students who are here, who God has entrusted us with, so that they can be transformed and equipped and empowered to do all that He is calling them to do, right? And not just fall to some of the challenges and drop out of our institutions. So in the early 1930s, McNeely had this model that prioritized a student selection for where they went, focused on college size and the time that it takes to complete the degree. So those are the factors that were seen as the biggest contributors to a student being successful. And you may have heard that when you were thinking about, where do you go to school? School counselors in high school still continue to use that. Do you want a small school or a large school, a faith-based or secular, research or more teaching-based, right? So that's how it began. But in the 70s and 80s, with Spady, Bean, and Tinto, there was this develop of student attrition models. And the student attrition models, they began to see factors that influence the retention of these students by focusing on student-to-student interactions, student-to-college interactions, and looking at some of those external factors like pre-college preparation, their social dynamics, as those key indicators on whether a student would be successful. Let's call it the right fit, right? And so sometimes programming and activities are influenced by, let's determine who our right fit is. Who is our ideal student? You may have heard that in some meetings. And programming is tailored towards that student. One of the challenges with that, though, is, what if the student doesn't fit to the right student, but God has them at your institution? Then what happens to them? Tinto in 87 and then 93, and then Pasquarello joined the field here in 79, started looking at student integration models. Now, this is one, once I learned about this model, I started seeing this show up in so many of our programming. The student integration model continued to focus on that right fit, but also introduced academic challenges. And they found that if students can't resolve the tension between educational and occupational goals, let's think about maybe their major, right? So what they want to do with their life and what they're studying, if that tension doesn't continue, they may be discouraged and drop out. It's the student's social life and academic life balance, right? And can we integrate them so that they begin to use the services and really develop a sense of belonging at the institution and be, so to speak, acculturated to what is needed to succeed here? Even as I say that, though, when I think about the Sojourner, right, I was one of those. Students that are coming from homeschooled populations, or my Native American, American Indian students that I was doing research with, or my newcomers, this idea of integration can be problematic. And I'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. Austin in 68 and then in 85 developed this new theory, the theory of involvement. And this moves on beyond just integrating to saying, the more that a student is involved at the university, the more likely it is that they will have that sense of belonging, they'll have the social networks, and they'll be successful. And especially in student affairs, student development, you may be functioning within this theory, right? Saying that the more that we create activities and the more that students show up to our residence activities or student life activities, or they show up to chapel, the more that they are going to feel like they belong and be part of the campus community, and then be successful. And so the theory of involvement also introduces having institutional policies that will encourage that, right? So if your program or if you yourself as a leader have this idea, you would say, well, I create certain requirements and programming that is required so that students will feel involved, they will get plugged in, they will be integrated into our culture, and then be successful. Some of the other models that also show up are the social and personal beliefs model that really look at behaviors, intention and beliefs that the student has as influencing factors. If your school values a lot of faculty involvement, they may be functioning under the student-faculty interactions model that Pasquarello developed in 1980. And this one said that those informal interactions, maybe those office hours that are required of faculty, or maybe the faculty showing up to chapel, or faculty that show up to student events. I remember we used to have at the college midnight breakfast, and all the faculty would come out and we'd create French toast and other meals for our students during finals, right? The institution valued this and was functioning under the student-faculty interactions model. And again, it was rooted in adding additional touch points for involvement, integrating the student into the campus culture to help them be more successful. Being in 85, I developed the dropout syndrome model and looking at data-driven decisions. So not only the intent to leave, but when the student actually leaves to measure what factors influence. And then 10 and 75 developed the college dropout model, looking at financial and social barriers that influence a student's dropout decision, and then the institutional support strategies that are used to support those students so they don't have to drop out because of those reasons. So I share the brief overview of some of the models and challenge you to think which of these models or combination of these models are showing up in the way that you yourself are doing programming in higher education. Before 1990, most of these models really contained generalizations that didn't account for the increasingly diversified student body. And when I was serving in student affairs prior to becoming a faculty member, that really just bothered me. I kept thinking, who's being left out? And I would see the types of students that would show up to our activities. And you're all student leaders, so I don't have to tell you twice. You know how frustrating it can be when you spend hours and hours on these activities, and then the same students are the ones that show up. And there's a whole body of the student body that are not benefiting from these services. They're not feeling involved, integrated. Right? These keywords keep coming up. The problem that I found with these traditional persistence models, though, is that they prioritize integration rather than leveraging the strengths that come with these different students and the demographics that they bring. There's cultural richness, and I don't mean just ethnic culture, but even community-specific values and strengths that can be leveraged by our institutions to serve them best. And so when I began doing research for my doctoral studies, I found 3 models that I really liked that were specific for working with Native American students, demographics, but I've found were very helpful for also supporting my homeschooled students and my newcomers at my institution. So this is where my research and my lived experience come together. And I want to challenge you, maybe engage in research or explore how these may be helpful for you. The first model was by Heavy Runner and DeSills in 2002, and that's the family education model. And this model suggests that institutions can act as advocates for social services and health services that develop strong support networks with students and their communities, their families, and really values this the strength that comes from community and culture to the institution itself. And so, again, developing that network between them. Guillory in 2009 took this even further and said, how do we maintain family and community connections with the institution? And began to address maybe some unique challenges in particular communities, like single parent households, or different family dynamics, where maybe it's grandparents or aunt, uncle, or a friend that's raising this student as they come into a freshman, and really developing culturally responsive services that are going to be better equipped than just saying, join this club, integrate into us so that you can be successful. And again, completely might erase the culture or values or strengths that they bring as they enter our institutions. And then this was the most radical one that I really found interesting. And as I began to apply it intentionally, saw an increase in the retention of my homeschooled students and my Native American students. And this was Waterman's 2012 model that encouraged homegoing behavior. That is returning to home for support to let's say like plug in and re-energize to come back fully ready to engage and learn and grow uh, as part of the college experience. And so this contradicted the notion that students must leave their home, be residential students, fully integrate and get actively involved on their campus to be successful. They said, no, there might be some students that could really benefit from intentional activities that go back home, right? And so I'll talk about what that might look like in a second and some of the strategies that we used. So what are institutions doing currently? They apply these models in their recruitment and admission strategies. So you might hear admissions departments talking about the ideal student, or you program your activities based on the ideal student that you're seeking to serve. That's that right fit coming back in. You might be thinking about orientation strategies. So maybe new student orientation or residential orientation begins before the academic year, and you begin to acculturate the student into our campus culture. This is who you need to know. This is where services are. This is what we value, our mission and vision, all part of that orientation, really getting them integrated into our campus. But again, as I said, that isn't always the best approach for everyone. If your institution values those academic factors, right, it may be the early assessment and placement strategies. And so they do that to really equip them and ensure that the college preparation is there or remediated so that they can be successful. And then as many institutions, including mine, we really prioritize that first year experience. All the data supports that it's between freshman and sophomore year that is so critical for students to continue and finish their degree. And so we create all sorts of first year experiences. Again, a lot of them, though, are created using some of these models or influenced, even if we're not cognizant of it, influenced by these models over the years that seek to integrate, culturate, involve the student, and really neglect the value of that home connection, that bridge to that home life. So the research that I conducted for my doctoral studies, I found three key themes that were really helpful for supporting these students. And these themes were leadership opportunities, creating mentorship opportunities, and institution community connections. Now, that sounds pretty obvious, but what I found that was unique in this study was the leadership opportunities were opportunities to lead in culturally or community specific groups on campus, but these students didn't have to carry the burden of all the administration and the support of these programs. They had faculty and staff that allocated resources, and it became part of the campus culture. So these students weren't just part of multicultural committee on the side or ethnic particular group. No, no, no. The institution valued their integration and the strengths that they would bring. And so then they incorporated it into the mission of the institution itself. So in a way, these new communities began to shape and really redefine how we did things on campus. These students were given a voice, not just representation. So that was powerful. Mentorship opportunities, I found this triangulation between students that had mentors at the institution and mentors in their community, and these mentors communicated, right? So in a way, the student had a clear bridge between who can I go to when I'm on campus and who can I go to when I'm at home, and there is alignment between my support networks. And the institutions and these programs supported that connection between institutional members and stakeholders in the community. Powerful. And the last one was institution community connections. And so these were opportunities where institutions were in the community as appropriate, and the community was in the institution as well. This, these, even though it was specific to Native American students that I was researching, I do believe this can be applied to homeschooling, newcomers, and many other communities to leverage the strength and the values that come from having these members. And so I began implementing these three strategies that I want to share with you today. The first one is prioritizing relationships. We began having programs during the summer that introduced the campus, faculty, and staff in our culture to members of these communities. But it wasn't just our traditional come during the summer for 1 week and be integrated. No, we worked with community members to have their leaders be part of our leadership team that coordinated this activity so that when students showed up, they felt at home. There was no need to integrate because they were already part of the campus and they could be themselves and fully leverage the support networks that they were earning as they entered the environment and that they were bringing with them as they came from their community. We also had fieldwork and internship opportunities in those communities to expose more of our campus community to those spaces. We had tutoring opportunities with homeschooled families, so our college students were getting to understand how that culture worked. We had internship and fieldwork opportunities at the reservations around us for the local Native American population, those nations that are in the land that we reside in now. And we had intentional recruitment efforts during community-specific events as appropriate, which we learned by having those cultural guides, those stakeholders in the community. So in essence, we prioritized relationships and created spaces where community could host and be part of the campus and the culture that was now merging, and also the campus could be in the community being an active member and participant providing services, and it created this two-way street, right? That leads to my second strategy, and it's meeting them where they are, them being the students that we're seeking to serve. And so those service learning and civic engagement in the community, so that when a student comes and enters our institution, they don't feel like foreigners, right? We have been active participants in the community. And the last one is creating leadership opportunities that maximize the university and the strengths of the community. And so these are members of the community that are serving on advisory boards and other leadership on campus, so that again, it's not just representation, but it's a voice on the table, a voice into the programming, a voice into the way that we interact. And so as students enter this foreign environment, as I once did, okay, the services will be more accessible. The support services and networking will be relatable and approachable, and students will be empowered because there is a clear bridge between the home life and the institution. And this collaborative and leadership development will continue to grow the institution with a more dynamic and more responsive approach. I look forward to connecting with you during our Q&A time to continue having conversations around how do we do this? How do we implement some of these strategies at your institution and the strengths that maybe you have seen as you reflect back on these theories? All right, God bless you all.